It was supposed to be just another late-night interview. Another night of polished jokes, rehearsed laughter, and carefully planned conversation. But what unfolded inside that brightly lit television studio became one of the most unforgettable confrontations in modern broadcast history. This is the story of the night Donald Trump walked off late night with Seth Meyers, and how a few minutes of live television exposed something much deeper about politics, power, and truth in America. The date was announced weeks in advance, and the reaction was instant. Donald J. Trump, the businessman turned reality star turned U.S. president, was set to appear on Late Night with Seth Meyers. For many viewers, this wasn't just another celebrity interview. It was a collision between two men with unfinished business. Their history went back nearly a decade. In 2011, at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, Seth Meyers had publicly roasted Trump, mocking his business empire and questioning his presidential ambitions. The jokes were brutal, and the cameras captured Trump's frozen expression as the audience roared with laughter. Some say that night planted a seed, that it was humiliation, not ambition, that fueled Trump's path to the presidency. Now, years later, the tables had turned. Seth Meyers was behind a desk on his own late-night stage. Trump was no longer the man in the audience. He was a guest, the headline, the one walking into enemy territory. From the moment the booking was confirmed, rumors swirled inside NBC's offices. Would Seth go easy on him? Would Trump use the show as a platform to attack his critics? No one knew for sure, but everyone, from producers to the studio audience, sensed that something unpredictable was about to happen. On the evening of the taping, the studio buzzed with nervous energy. Crew members rehearsed transitions. The audience filled their seats, excited and anxious. The stage lights dimmed, the band began to play, and Seth Meyers stepped out to deliver his monologue. Smiling, poised, pretending that tonight was just like any other night. But it wasn't. At exactly 11:38 p.m., the band's tone changed. The applause sign lit up. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer said, "Please welcome Donald Trump." The crowd reacted instantly. Half cheers, half boos, all energy. Trump walked out with his familiar swagger, waving confidently, that trademark red tie catching the light. He reached the desk, extended his hand toward Seth, and smiled. But his eyes, sharp, unblinking, told another story. For a brief second, the two men just stared at each other. Then, with cameras rolling, the conversation began. Seth opened softly. "Mr. President, thank you for joining us tonight." Trump replied, "Always happy to tell the truth directly to the American people without the fake news filter." The audience chuckled. Seth smiled, the kind of smile that hides more than it shows. "Well," he said, "we'll try to keep it honest then." The first few minutes were light. Small talk about business, family, the economy. Seth asked polite questions. Trump gave confident answers. It was smooth, almost friendly, until Seth shifted the tone. "Mr. President," he said, "you've often said you're treated unfairly by the media. But do you think some of the criticism might come from your own words or actions?" Trump leaned forward, his voice hardening. "Absolutely not. The media lies. They twist everything I say because they can't stand that I'm successful. They hate winners." Seth tilted his head. "So everyone else is lying except you?" Trump smirked. "I've been right about everything. Russia, the economy, the border, all of it. And deep down, even you know that." The tension was growing. The audience felt it. The laughs became uneasy. The space between their words began to stretch like a tightrope ready to snap. Then Seth asked a question that changed everything. "Mr. Trump, you've called yourself a victim of political persecution. Do you realize how strange that sounds, coming from a billionaire and a former president?" Trump froze for half a second. The air in the room shifted. He leaned in, his voice sharper now. "You think that's funny?" Seth didn't blink. "I think it's confusing." Trump's expression hardened. "You comedians think you're smarter than everyone else. You sit behind a desk, reading jokes someone else wrote, pretending to understand the world." Seth replied calmly. "And yet, somehow, that gets under your skin." The crowd erupted. Cheers, boos, whistles, gasps. The line between comedy and confrontation had vanished. Trump gestured toward the audience. See that? Fake reactions. Fake people. That's what this show is. Fake. Seth leaned closer. The cameras are on, Mr. Trump. You don't have to perform. You can just answer. Trump snapped back. I don't perform. I win. For a moment, neither man spoke. It wasn't a comedy show anymore. It was a standoff. Then, breaking the silence, Seth asked one final question. You talk a lot about loyalty, about how people turn on you. But isn't loyalty supposed to go both ways? That was a spark. Trump's jaw tightened. His hands curled. He stood up, ripping off his microphone. The sound of the clip hitting the desk echoed through the studio. I'm done, he said. You're not a host. You're a propagandist. You insult people for attention. And I don't need it. He turned toward the audience. Some shouting, some clapping, and walked off the stage. The cameras followed as he disappeared behind the curtain, leaving Seth standing alone under the hot lights. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then Seth exhaled, straightened his papers, and said softly, Well, that just happened. The crowd laughed nervously. The band began to play. And the world had just witnessed history. Within minutes, the clip was everywhere. Social media exploded. News outlets replayed the moment on loop, each adding their own spin. Supporters called Trump a hero who refused to tolerate liberal bias. Critics said he simply couldn't handle tough questions. But behind the headlines, something else was unfolding. Inside the NBC building, the control room was chaos. Producers debated whether to air the full, unedited version or cut the walkout short. In the end, they decided to show everything. The raw footage, Trump's anger, Seth's calm, the stunned reaction, all of it went live. The ratings skyrocketed. Overnight, Late Night with Seth Meyers became the most-watched late-night program in the country. Every major network ran their own version of the story. Talk shows, news programs, political podcasts, all dissected the encounter from every angle. And as the dust settled, both men retreated into silence. Trump's team quickly released a statement. They called the interview a setup, claiming Seth had promised a light, positive discussion, but turned it into an ambush. The president will always stand up to disrespect, the statement read. Seth, on the other hand, said nothing for days. When he finally addressed it, his response was brief. If asking questions makes someone angry, he said, maybe the problem isn't the question. The audience applauded for nearly a full minute. In the days that followed, late-night hosts and journalists across the country weighed in. Some sided with Trump, saying he'd been baited. Others praised Seth for staying calm under pressure. Even veteran hosts like Jon Stewart and David Letterman were asked for their thoughts. Stewart summed it up in one line. That wasn't politics. That was ego meeting accountability, and ego blinked first. But the story didn't end there. Behind closed doors, insiders revealed more. Trump had reportedly been frustrated with his staff for booking the appearance. He had expected a friendly chat, not an interrogation. According to one aide, he left the studio fuming, saying he's finished. That guy's never getting another interview. Meanwhile, NBC executives were both thrilled and anxious. The ratings were record-breaking, but the backlash was fierce. Some advertisers threatened to pull out, while others doubled down, knowing controversy meant attention. And for Seth Meyers, the days after the walkout were strangely quiet. Friends described him as reflective, even uneasy, not because he regretted what happened, but because he understood what it revealed, that in modern America, truth had become entertainment. And sometimes entertainment was the only way to get people to face the truth. Over the following months, the Trump walkout became a cultural landmark. It was studied in journalism schools, analyzed in media ethics classes, and debated on political panels. It wasn't just about Trump or Seth anymore. It was about what their clash represented. A nation divided not only by politics, but by perception. One side saw bravery. The other saw arrogance. One side saw integrity. The other saw bias. But through all the noise, one fact remained undeniable. The cameras had captured something real, something unscripted, something raw. In an age of filters and spin, that alone was extraordinary. Even years later, the clip continues to resurface, shared online whenever discussions of truth, media, or power return to the spotlight. People still argue over who was right, who was wrong, who crossed the line. But the lasting impact of that night isn't in who won. It's in what it exposed. It showed how fragile power can be when it's questioned, how easily confidence can turn into anger, and how the stage, that glowing, smiling, seemingly harmless stage, can become a battlefield for something far greater than laughter. That night, Donald Trump didn't just walk off a talk show. He walked away from a conversation, one that America still hasn't finished having. Because in the end, the clash between comedian and a president wasn't just about words. It was about what happens when truth refuses to stay silent and power refuses to listen. And as the lights dimmed and the studio fell quiet, Seth Meyers looked down at his notes, the ones he never got to finish, and smiled faintly. For him, the interview wasn't failure. It was proof that sometimes the loudest sound in the world isn't applause. It's the echo of someone walking away.